Welcome to How to Split a Toaster, a divorce podcast about saving your relationships from True Story FM. Today, the pieces of the puzzle.
Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Seth Nelson with my good friend Pete Wright, and get ready to talk about your favorite jigsaw puzzle.
I got an email from a friend who is going through the process. I guess you could say she's finished with the process, and I asked her, how are you doing? I said,
from an emotional level, how are you doing?
Yeah, but you know, I don't even know that was what I was intending. I said, hey, how are you doing? And boy, did she tell me. And she told me all about the last year that has led up to this moment last Wednesday where she sat through.
Let me pause you for a minute. When you said hey, how you doing? Where everyone usually says, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And that's what you were expecting, but she actually answered your question.
She did, because she's lovely and super authentic that way. And it's on me. I should have known. And I got the answer. And it ended in last Wednesday. We sat through 9 3/4 hours of mediation and I finally signed on the line that is dotted, and I was awarded the house. So the kids stay in the neighborhood. And it was just all of the things that she got out of this. And she said, I think it's all making sense now. Which, here she's at the very end of the process, and the punchline is, today, it all makes sense.
Right.
Does that warm your heart a little bit or break it?
Both. And the reason for that is what she described to you is exactly what we're going to discuss today. At the end, all the puzzle pieces were put together and she saw the picture. There's two things about the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle that I like to use because it just makes sense. I'm going to start at the end.
Okay.
And then we're going to go back to the beginning. And the end is where you really don't want to be unless you absolutely have to get there. And that's in a trial.
Okay.
So when I'm going to court and I'm sitting there about to present my case, and I'm doing an opening statement where I'm telling the judge, this is what I believe the evidence will show you. And therefore, this is really the only conclusion you can come to. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I do that with the metaphor of a jigsaw puzzle, because there isn't one piece that tips the scales in these types of cases. There isn't that smoking gun document that you see in the movies. It's you put together slowly, methodically in trial, what's called your evidence, and it's one piece of the puzzle. It's one piece of the puzzle, and you fill it in. And by doing that, you're laying the picture for the judge on what you believe the outcome should be, what the picture should look like. What is the parenting plan? What's the time sharing, what people think of as custody and visitation? How are we going to divide the assets? That's going to be a part of the picture. What, if any, alimony is going to be paid? That's going to come in by, well, this was how much they were earning, or this is their incomes, or this is what they were spending. You just build it piece by piece, methodically and slowly. And at the end, you figure out what the child support is going to be. And then anything else, how much for attorney's fees and costs. Now, it's all based upon the law, and you have to tie it into the law, but that's kind of like the borders, right?
Yeah.
We're confined with the borders of the law, and within it, here's the picture and how it should come out.
I'd like to take a stab real quick at breaking your metaphor. Can I?
Yeah, go ahead. And we can mix metaphors, all sorts of crazy stuff.
Let's do it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I feel like from your perspective, it's a jigsaw puzzle and all the pieces will eventually fit together. When I put myself into the shoes of my friend, what I see is a jigsaw puzzle where all of the pieces are not just of different shapes, but of different scales. Like some of the pieces are giant and some of the pieces are very, very small. And when you think back to a year ago or 2 years ago when this whole process started, how could you, there are things that from the perspective of somebody going through divorce, these pieces will never fit together. in this puzzle. They're terrifying. They weigh too much. I can't move them, and I'm breaking my back trying to see a world in which this thing will eventually make sense. Right?
You're not breaking it at all. That's exactly what they're doing. They've just taken this box of puzzle pieces and they've dumped it out, and they have no idea what the picture is going to look like. You can look at it as if they're doing it from the backside of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And how does it all fit together? Some of these pieces don't even look like they belong here. I don't understand how this works. Is this thing that's happening to me a big issue, a big puzzle piece or not? It feels big, but in the scope of this divorce, is this big? Is my lawyer going to say it's big? Is the judge going to say it's big? How does this all fit together? And it is so overwhelming,
right,
to people that sometimes they just freeze. They literally just freeze, like, oh my, I can't deal. I can't even flip the pieces over,
right,
to figure out what colors go with what. Where are the borders? Oh my God, I found a corner. That's great.
Why is this one all black and making a sucking sound? Like I don't. I don't know how to do this, and so I'm curious. I'm curious first how you want to walk through this process where we start assigning, things and anxieties and fears to specific puzzle pieces. But what I love about it, and what I want to make sure I get out of my head up front, is that it's still a puzzle for you, and you're the divorce attorney.
Yes.
That's a warming feeling. It's still a puzzle for everybody.
I think you've touched on a great point. The reason it is a puzzle for me at the very beginning is I don't know all the pieces. Mm-hmm. When someone first calls me, and if they just said, how much alimony am I going to get?
You can't answer that question.
Can't answer it. That's like saying, Seth, bake me a cake. How's it going to taste? What ingredients am I putting in? You don't know until you start gathering the information, which we talked about early on. What kind of information? Okay. So when it's a puzzle to me, because one, I don't know all the pieces yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know even what are the issues. You might tell me all this stuff about parenting, and you're saying, I just want half the time with my kids and split holidays evenly. And you're like, oh my God, we're going to fight and fight and fight. This person's not going to give me 50-50 on the other side. And then I call up the other lawyer and I'm like, well, what's your client thinking about parenting? They say 50-50. Boom. Big puzzle piece done.
Right.
Right. So you might not have to worry about that puzzle piece. If you don't have kids, that's not even part of the puzzle. So it's a mystery to me still on what are the real issues? How far apart are we on those issues? People will say, we're going to have a huge fight over alimony, let's say. I'm like, okay, let's define huge fight. Are we talking the difference between $1,000 a month and $1,500? Or are we talking the difference between no alimony and $20,000?
Right.
Like a month. What are we arguing about?
And not knowing the answer to that from the perspective of somebody about to go through the divorce, that's what makes the puzzle piece so big and overwhelming.
Right. And you're going to assume the worst.
Of course.
And that assumption drives so much anxiety and so much fear when we should slow down and focus on, I am okay today.
Right.
People spend a lot of time saying, I'm so worried about the future, which I get. We're talking about your future. I'm not discounting that. But for today, the bills are getting paid. Mm-hmm. Or let's say some of the bills aren't getting paid. Are we still okay? We understand that someone's trying to control the money. But for today, are we okay? And if not, how do we get to, quote, okay? What are the steps? What is the process of putting this puzzle together?
I'm really curious how you approach that, right? Because we've talked at length about how you don't want to be my friend and how I'm not paying you to be my friend. And yet at some point, in order for you, I'm hypothesizing here. In order for you to do your best work for me, you have to get me to the point that I can be rational in a state of overwhelm, that I can be adaptable to change and willing to sort of go the extra mile to give you what you need to make my life to solve this puzzle for me. How do you start with that?
Well, just because I'm not your friend doesn't mean that we don't trust each other, or that you don't trust me, or that you don't believe in my advice and counsel. You might not be friends with your doctor, but when they say, this is what you need, you're either going to have that trust in them or not. Right? Now, in an emotional practice area such as family law, that trust and making sure that you feel like you are being heard is vitally important. So here are some things you can do to make sure you're being heard. You can ask your lawyer, and I do this frequently with clients. You can say, can you repeat back what I just said? And I'll say, someone will tell me something. I'll say, let me repeat this back to make sure I'm understanding what you're telling me. No different than when you go to a restaurant and you order food and the waiter or waitress repeats back your order.
Sure.
It's the same concept of communication.
Right.
So that's one thing. The other thing that you might want to consider doing is when your lawyer explains something to you, you can say, I'm going to repeat that back to make sure I understand it. I almost quiz my clients on Florida family law or what did I just tell you? Because that way I know whether they understood and were communicating. Because especially in times of COVID, when you're working from home and maybe I'm doing a Zoom consultation and they're in the room, there's no kids around, but their friend walks by and they get distracted, or the dog does something funny and they get distracted. And maybe that was the important point that I was trying to get across in answering their question. And they kind of nodded and I thought it was okay. But having clarity on the issue or what other information we need, what other puzzle pieces do we need to get closer to resolving the issue? What are the next steps? Are we looking for the borders? Are the borders complete? Are we just dividing up the puzzles and getting different colors in areas or shapes? Or how are we doing that? So to always be double checking on where are you in the process? And I don't mean how far away from mediation or trial. What do you need to get your lawyer? How do you give it to your lawyer? Those are all little puzzle pieces that your lawyer's going to need and you're going to need to calm down the anxiety. So let me give you an example.
Please.
Literally a hurricane/tropical storm just came through Florida, Tampa, right where I live.
Scary
stuff. Florida, we're kind of used to them. We know how to do these. You know, it is frequent that a hurricane will come through on some sort of day when some child is going from one parent's house to the other parent's house. And now a parent, and they're going through a divorce. It's just temporary agreement. It's not in writing anywhere on what happens, or maybe it is. And then one parent says, I'm not driving. You're 40 minutes away. I'm not going to drive, an hour and a half in essence, 40 minutes there, 45 minutes there, and 45 minutes back to do this exchange during a hurricane.
Yeah.
Right.
That only seems to make sense.
It would only seem to make sense, but for the fact that that parent will use any excuse not to do an exchange. And so this is kind of like the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, really, now it's another excuse. And now the other side's like, no, the storm is 200 miles away. They haven't closed the roads yet. It's fine. I live in a safer house than you live in because that old oak tree that I told you that we should have cut down years ago is still hanging over the house. So let's get her over here.
There are situations in which it could be a good excuse that, you don't actually go out in the car in the hurricane. But this might not be one. And it seems like low-hanging fruit.
Right. But I started with, oh, look, the person doesn't want to drive. And you're like, oh, that's perfectly reasonable. And then I took the other side and like, oh, but here's all these other reasons. What I did there was add more pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah.
To have you come to a different conclusion. Then you're like, oh, wait a minute. The storm's 200 miles away. The roads are still open. There's this tree. Maybe it is safer to exchange the child. Let's say that child doesn't come to you that night. You'll be worried. You'll be scared. You're always concerned about your relatives. You always think the worst. Okay. But at the same time, that might not be the thing to get so riled up about.
Sure.
Right? Okay, can I do FaceTime this night? Let's make sure. I want to make sure that she's okay. So you can have some communication, or let her know if she wakes up in the middle of the night. It depends on how old the child is too. But if they wake up in the middle of the night and they want to text me, I'll probably be up. Like we can do, like, can you have her call me first thing in the morning or text in the morning when the storm is past? Or there's things like that can help lower the anxiety level. And not with this past hurricane, but in previous hurricanes, I know colleagues of mine, we've got flooded with calls. That's really a bad term with a hurricane, flooded with calls.
Oh, yeah.
So, but literally, they're not bringing the kids. The court, so you call your lawyer, you want your lawyer to do something. There's almost nothing I'm going to be able to do. I'm not going to be able to race into court and say, Judge, we're going to do this exchange. You're going to have to learn to adapt and adjust. Let's make a note of it. Maybe we show that puzzle piece later about he was just taking more time. We're asking for a makeup day, but to just lower the anxiety.
You said earlier we were talking about trust and trusting your lawyer. Just because you're not friends, it doesn't mean you don't trust them. Is there such a thing as increasing trust or assumption of goodwill between two people once they get into the divorce process?
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's a lot of angst and animosity that leads to the divorce, but everything you're telling me here is I need to be able to assume goodwill just to get the puzzle put together. I need to be able to trust that we, soon to be former spouses, are going to do the right thing by each other and by our family so that I can get this puzzle put together and get to the other side of it. That seems to be important guidance right now.
There are people listening to you right now, Pete, thinking, not a chance in hell.
Right?
Not a chance in hell. So there's a couple things here. One, you can discount motive. So when I'm settling a case and making an offer, people say, well, what do you think they're thinking? Why do you think you're doing this? I'm like, I don't care. What I care about is getting the ultimate outcome in your case that we want, that you think is best for your kids or best for you financially or whatever the case may be. And if it's a deal that works for you, you don't care if they're in the other room flipping a coin saying, heads, I'm going to make this offer, tails, I'm going to make this offer. And so many people and their emotions are so heightened that sometimes people will act, as Laura Gallagher told us, against their best interest. So then someone says, why are they doing this? I said, why are we trying to put a rational reason to an irrational problem?
Right.
If you're dealing with someone with mental illness, it's very difficult to come up with a rational reason to help that person through whatever they're dealing with, because their mind is elsewhere.
Right.
Think of any teenage daughter you've ever had.
All of them.
Right. Right? Even the boys, right? You're trying to put a rational solution to what you know is an irrational problem, but in their mind, it's perfectly rational. Dad, you don't know anything.
Sure.
So let's discount motive and just deal with the issue at hand. Because their motive might be, I just want to piss off my spouse.
Yeah.
I don't really care about having more time with the children. I know this is going to hurt her. I just want to piss him off. And so I'm going to swipe that credit card again because I know it dings on his phone. And I know that he's out on a date with somebody else right now. Discount motive. Let's just deal with the problem. Let's work the problem. The other thing is lower your expectations.
As in?
You have to expect that your spouse, every time they talk to you or text you, is going to say mean things. And when they do, it's water off a duck's back. Like, I've heard it all before. Let me just solve this problem.
Yeah. It's why we're getting a divorce.
Right.
It's not news.
The fact that you can never say anything nice to me, we are going to do that. So back to that puzzle that you were kind of playing with a little bit there, is you have to not, you can discount their motive when you're trying to put all these puzzle pieces together. Or you can give them the benefit of the doubt and say, this is just the way he is. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't think he's trying to hurt me. He just doesn't understand. Okay. Or another option is just lower your expectations. It doesn't really impact you, right? Or maybe think they're trying to help. They're just not good at it. They're trying to like be a dad now and they never have been before. They just don't know how to do it.
Right.
Right.
I had a very good friend and colleague who used to say in times of overwhelm, emotional overwhelm, stop. Let's just try to live for a minute in fact and truth, right? Your power in any given situation ends with your skin. Your power ends with your skin. It ends in what you can touch. It ends in what you can immediately control. It doesn't end in the stories that we imagine about our former spouse. It doesn't end in, like you say, their motive. We can't do anything about what they're thinking. We can't do it. All we can do is respond to what is in front of us, fact and truth.
You said a key word is respond. I don't react because reaction's without thought. Responding is with thought. It's a choice. How am I going to respond to this? Back to the premise of this podcast about the relationship. What we're really talking about now when you're going through and figuring out all these puzzles and how you're going to respond, we're talking about the relationship with yourself. Do you want to do things differently in getting through this process? So many times when I'm talking to a potential client, they want to tell me about their spouse. I will work hard to explain the process, the substantive law, because I have information they need whether they hire me or not. And that's how I approach every potential client. I am not there to sell them on my services. I'm there to provide them with information whether they hire me or not. When I do that, I then have them focus on them and their goals and how we can potentially accomplish those goals. And if they give me goals that I know in our puzzle are outside those borders, outside the law, I will say that's not something I can get you in court in the law unless you and your spouse agree to it. So by example, in Florida, there's no requirement for a parent to pay for an adult child's education, college education. Now, you can agree to do that, and that's now a contract that will be enforced by the court. But if they say, all I want is him to pay for all their college educations, unless he agrees, I'm not getting that for you. That's outside of our borders.
Right.
I really think it's important to think about what your goals are. So, for example, in Florida, we have like 20 different factors that the court looks at, things that the court looks at in determining what's best for the children. I will have my clients go through every factor and write out what they do well and what they do poorly, what the other side does well and the other side does poorly. And if I go through all 20 factors and there isn't one positive thing you're saying about your spouse in parenting, there's going to be an issue. I can't recall a case where there wasn't one thing that a parent did well. There might have been 19 other things that were so horrible, it doesn't matter that they did well on that one thing.
Yeah, right.
That one thing might be, I know that he loves the children. But then you have, and he suffers from alcoholism and he cannot care for himself nor them. But let me tell you, in the few moments when he's sober, he loves them to death.
Yeah.
Right. That's where it just outweighs it. That puzzle piece is bigger. That picture is going to come into play bigger than he loves them. That's going to be a little heart in the corner.
I told you about my friend who said on the last day of everything she signs it, she says, starts making sense. What's your experience working with clients? At what point does the shape of the puzzle start to come together?
Each client is different. The more of the pieces that are put together, obviously, it makes more sense. So once we kind of go through the factors and we go through a parenting plan and we start saying, hey, this is where the kids will go back and forth. when you start going through what are the list of assets and debts, and we start figuring out how those might get divided. That might be, hey, I'm going to talk to a mortgage broker and see whether I can afford this house if I have an alimony range of this amount. Because you just don't know. You haven't applied for a mortgage on your own to refinance this house. What does that look like? What does that look like depending on who takes what debts? That starts helping the process take shape, helping that puzzle come together. I will tell you that the biggest difference I see in clients is once a marital settlement agreement is signed,
there's a lot of weight that's lifted off of your shoulders, right?
Just exhale. And then usually a year after you're divorced.
A year after?
That people are back to being themselves. And I've talked to psychologists about this and marriage counselors. They say, don't get into a serious relationship until you're actually divorced for 1 year.
Did you ever see any high school movie about rebounds?
Exactly. Yeah. How many can you name right now?
Yeah.
You can name a bunch.
On. It's just too much.
I was actually just thinking about my historical relationships and thought, yeah, I didn't really follow that rule, And I was explaining to my son Kai in the land of COVID about how, like you say, Pete, a cobbler's son never has new shoes.
Yeah.
I told him there are a couple things that Mommy and I have decided that are 100% the advice I would give to a client. And he, of course, is 16. It's like, oh, what is that? And I said, well, we're in COVID and we decided to go to a 1 week on, 1 week off schedule. You're 16. That's a typical schedule for high school kids. But I jump up and down and tell my clients, it's your decision, but it's really best to do the exchange on a Friday night or a Monday.
Oh, no.
So you have the full weekend.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Sunday afternoon. Sometime in Sunday is when Kai goes back and forth.
I feel like I have been quizzed and embarrassed by this, by you.
Yeah.
On that very point.
Yeah, exactly.
Seth.
But the ultimate point to save this and not realize that I'm not just taking my advice, always underlying advice is whatever works for you and your family in the least amount of conflict as possible. But of course, when I tell Kai this story, he goes, maybe Friday or Monday is a better exchange day. I'm like, I'm about to get in trouble with your mom.
Smart kid.
I just want people today to just realize that it is a step-by-step process. That's the metaphor for these puzzle pieces. Yeah. Not any one thing is going to be so impactful that it is going to change the entire landscape of your divorce proceeding. There are some that will be bigger than others. It's very, very rare that there is the smoking gun document that changes everything. It might change dividing up assets and equitable distribution. It might be, oh, this wasn't really a loan. It was a gift. And that's a big number, right? I know at the beginning I said, look, I'm going to start at the end where we don't want to be in trial.
Yeah.
So many people get hung up on 50-50 on either parenting or money or allocation of debt or alimony or how much, they just get so locked into this position. And if you think about your life in its entirety, and let's say you're asking for 50-50, which is what should happen, but your spouse is about to make this long drawn out trial. And is it worth the money to get 50-50 when you can get 60-40, a difference of 10%? I'm purposely using percentages and not amount of money because amount of money means different things to different people. Some people will say, oh, we don't really have that much. And I'll look at their assets and they have a net worth of $15 million. But they're comparing themselves to others that have more than 15 million,
right? Where
most of us would say, oh my God, they're loaded, right? So I'm purposely not putting it in money, but as a percentage. So let's say you get 40% and the other side gets 60 and you're like, oh my God, they're getting 20% more. Well, that 10% really might not have much of an impact in your life over the length of your life. If you're early in your marriage and you're relatively young in your 30s and you're splitting up 10 grand might feel like a ton of money, or 10% might feel like a lot today.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time you're 60, you're not really going to notice that. Keep it in perspective. We're all very focused on the moment, which I think it's good to be focused on. Hey, one day at a time, let's do this. But if you can keep that big picture of, let's not argue over the 10%, because if we argue over it, it's really only going to be 5% anyway, because the other 5% is going to the lawyers, the accountants, the legal fees, the costs, right? We're going to shrink that pie. It's better to have a bigger pie that you don't get half of than a smaller pie that you get half of.
I just feel like it when you're looking at a spreadsheet, it's so easy to get stuck in that percentages and dollars. And when you look at your stuff and you look at the things that are important to you, the emotional value of those things may far outweigh the value on a spreadsheet. And so you might be getting 10% less, but what you get, if that's the stuff that's really important to you, you might be getting much, much more.
Right. If in your 40%,
it includes all the stuff that was most important to you.
Right. Right. And even the stuff that's like most important.
Yeah.
And this is different for me, and I appreciate that I might have a different perspective. I am not a pack rat.
You're a stoic. You're practically a Scandinavian stoic.
Right. I can't wait to see how you play that out over time now, Pete. So in putting this puzzle together, just to kind of close on this thought, is focus on yourself. Do it one day at a time. And if it's overwhelming to you, all the stuff your lawyer's asking you to get you to fill in this puzzle, if you just don't have it, ask some clear questions. What do you need? Can I get you these documents a little bit at a time? Because I only have enough bandwidth to deal with this 3 hours a week, because I'm dealing with the kids, all this stuff. Okay, what can you get me in 3 hours a week? And if it's going too slowly, what can I do as your lawyer to help you do this? I've had clients come in and sit down with my paralegal on our computer and be like, okay, let's go through it. Let's get online. Oh, I don't know my password. Let's change your password. Forgot password. Okay, it comes up on your phone. Hit the link. Give us the number. Boom. We change your password. Now we can download your statements for you. Mm-hmm. What can we do to help you through the process? Don't sit down with your lawyer and do that. That's too expensive. See if they have someone else in their office at a lower hourly rate to help you get that done. If you have a friend that can help you get that done.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't have to be you sitting at your computer alone. Have a girlfriend come over like you talked about. Hey, maybe your girlfriend can help you find a new place and go look at an apartment when we were talking to Jamie. Maybe the thing is, I really need help with the computer. I'm terrible at it. My lawyer's asking me for this list of things. Do you have an hour to help me out?
Because that's probably all it will take, right? We'll build the puzzle piece up so that it's going to take me all weekend. It's going to take forever. But really, once you solve the one clogging task that's right in the way of getting those statements, it will all flow.
The worrying is worse than the doing.
It sure is.
Think about it one step at a time. Build the puzzle. If parts are missing, talk to your lawyer about how we can fill in those pieces. And that might help you just take this a little bit easier. Not any one thing is going to be a major deal. Deep breath. It will feel like it. I appreciate that. I'm not downplaying the emotional side to this. Take a deep breath. Get the app Calm. Get your iPhone watch to tell you to breathe. Just exhale. I hope that's helpful to people today. I'm sure we're going to get pounded with emails saying, bring back Black's Law Dictionary.
I was just going to say this is a controversial episode, but we hope you continue listening in spite of it. What ultimately may be our undoing. Thank you very much, Seth Nelson. As always, you Scandinavian stoic, handsome prince of the North.
Oh my God! If they Google me, they're going to be so disappointed.
And thank you, everyone, for downloading and listening to this show. We sure appreciate you and the work that you are doing. Keep showing up. Make those puzzle pieces even smaller. We're going to take a little bit of a break for a couple of weeks over the holidays, the rest of December. This is going to mark the end of our first season of How to Split a Toaster. And we will be back with you early January with Season 2. So much good stuff planned. Until then, on behalf of Seth Nelson, I'm Pete Wright. Thanks for hanging out with us this season on How to Split a Toaster, a divorce podcast about saving your relationships.
Seth Nelson is an attorney with Nelson Coster Family Law and Mediation, with offices in Tampa, Florida. While we may be discussing family law topics, How to Split a Toaster is not intended to, nor is it providing legal advice. Every situation is different. If you have specific questions regarding your situation, please seek your own legal counsel with an attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction. Pete Wright is not an attorney or employee of Nelson Coster. Seth Nelson is licensed to practice law in Florida.